Thank you very much. So, pleasure to be here. Thank you for coming and making time for this terrific event. You know, it was interesting to see the 10-year video of this conference, because this year, Silver Spring Networks actually celebrated our 10th anniversary. And, you know, we continue to think of ourselves as a startup in a strange way, and yet 10 years later, it's absolutely very, very real. And that's actually a lot of what I want to talk about today, because I often am asked, there is a lot written and talked about the promise of what the smart grid could do. How real is that? Well, I'm here to tell you today that I believe we are past the tipping point. It is no longer a science experiment. And this is why we're talking here about beyond the smart meter, what else are you going to do with it? So let me sort of tell you a little bit about how we're going to talk about this in the next roughly 20 minutes. You know, a few years back, the notion that one network could actually deal with the multidisciplinary needs of a utility industry, energy industry, was nearly unthinkable. Now, today that still happens. There are worries about can it actually support it and so on. And I'll show you in the remaining presentation that in fact we're past that point. There are many, many customers doing many of those things. Now, one of the key reasons that this was possible was because of a fundamental belief about open standards, interoperability through and through, much as some other industries did, in order to unleash the power of an ecosystem. The recognition that one company, one small group of people perhaps were never going to be able to do it, but if you created a fundamental infrastructure by which large leverage was possible, much as happened in the telecom business and the IT businesses, could that happen in this industry? So I'm here to tell you that we are past the science experiments. Yes, there are people still continuing with science experiments all over the world, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to tell you, and I'll show you examples of how large amounts of leverage and unlocking of value is being done day in and day out on a scale of millions and millions of endpoints all over the place. And that really means that there's a significant de-risking that's occurred in the last 5 to 6 years in this business. And in terms of looking to the future, you know, I'm going to give you a few examples of the kind of things that are possible, and the speaker that follows me is also going to give you some really real live examples of their experiences in actually engaging consumers and, in fact, you know, being voted by their consumers with the highest scores in their business. And I'll leave that for Ken to talk about in a minute. So just a quick retrospective. If you look back 6 years to when, you know, the smart grid really started kind of on a significant ramp up, network performance at the time, believe it or not, was about 9,600 baud. Remember those days of 9.6 kb? Well, I'll show you in a minute on the right-hand side of the screen where we are today. Applications were absolutely very standalone. There was no notion that, in fact, the internal silos would even want to talk to each other or want to collaborate with each other. And vendors were absolutely not delivering any sort of interoperability. And security was weak at best. Well, 6 years later today, we're in a place where the network performance running at about 100 or 300 kb per second and growing, by the way. So that's just today's point. It's going to keep getting better. It's more than sufficient, and there are many energy companies around the world actively using the network for more than one thing. It's absolutely proven that even low latency requirements in distribution automation can in fact work on the same network on which meter reading is occurring and the same network on which demand response can be implemented. So interoperability and standards have arrived. They're being proven. They're being used. They are being used to create a very rich ecosystem full of choice. And of course, on the security side, it's commerce-grade security. If you do internet banking and you believe that, the underpinnings of that, of how those things are done, certificate-based security, those are the foundational elements of the security in this model. So how did this happen? Well, in our case, it started with a vision of being a network platform for many things over time. At the end of my presentation, I'll show you the sort of the grand destination of the Internet of Things and that we all talk about. But it started with the economic case being the most viable with metering. Now, the good news about that is that 5 years ago, the benefit to cost ratios were, just slightly above sort of historic industry averages. Well, today we're seeing our utility customers seeing benefit to cost ratios that are often 2 or more times better than historic industry averages that made the rate cases work. In fact, beyond that, we're now starting to see people really exceed the value that they expected, not just on the basic investment made in meter reading, but additional benefits that were never part of the base case because they're starting to leverage the same network to do more things, such as distribution automation and driving energy efficiency program, and starting to now contemplate really large-scale demand response efforts. So what scale are we talking about? Well, this is a sampling of our major customers. It's now over 13 million endpoints running day in and day out. This is why I say this is no longer a science experiment. It is no longer a matter of wondering and projecting the possible benefits. These are benefits that people are realizing every day. So, if you don't believe me, find the people with those logos on their badges today or tomorrow at the show and ask them. Because in the last, I've had a chance to talk to many of these customers over time, of course, and the stunning reality is that the network works. It delivers reads and mission-critical billing data, exceeding people's expectations, and that is exactly why they're now confident in being able to use the network to do more. So every one of these people are doing more than one thing with their network, either at a pilot stage or a full deployment stage. In fact, now we're starting to see customers who don't start with metering. In fact, one utility on here is going to start with demand response and do metering later. There are other people on here who are starting with distribution automation with no metering in their picture. In fact, it's quite interesting to see how global differences are showing up. There are regions of the world in which distribution automation and grid reliability are far more important than anything to do with getting a meter read or getting demand response to happen. So we are starting to see traction in new parts of the world based on the ability for the grid technology and our network to solve very difficult grid reliability issues. So I think this is really kind of an exciting time for this entire industry, and certainly these customers are living in exciting times in terms of moving forward. So the biggest the question I have here is, now that you have your AMI network working well, what else are you going to do with it? And I have 5 ideas for you just in case you were going to just sit there waiting. So let's dive in and talk about the 5 ideas that I would offer up to you. Number 1, higher reliability through far better comprehensive intelligence about what's going on during an outage. So last gasp from a meter is a great thing. That was kind of the most elementary thing that we would look for in knowing, well, which meter is out and where would that be and how are they clustered and what does that imply. But that's just the beginning, because it starts getting pretty complicated pretty quickly. Are there nested outages? What else is going on? Well, now we're starting to find that customers are integrating distribution automation elements with last gasp and metering elements to actually get a far more interesting result. So this past year, we introduced a two-way communicating fault circuit indicator, hangs on the wire, is powered inductively, and essentially emits a signal when there's no current flowing. Now that has allowed utilities who are trying this to get down to about 500 feet in terms of knowing where an outage is. So that is dramatically improving the time to locate the specific outage and be able to be much more efficient at dispatch. The third part of this is, now when you couple this with communicating technology that allows you to get to reclosers and various other devices in the substation, you suddenly have a much more holistic approach. So, you know, the catchphrase that we use internally was, a year or two ago, we were talking about we should have an outage detection system that works really well. And these days, what we really talk about is, you know, outage detection is really nice, but isn't the bigger deal restoration acceleration? Because that's actually the thing that you really want, right? It's great that you found the outage. The problem is, how do you restore power at a faster rate? All right, number 2, precision DR. So historically, there's been lots of ways to get demand response. There have been industrial customers that have been the primary target. Well, now we have just introduced this in the past several months, load control switches that directly hang onto our network. So you still have the capability to have Zigbee-based devices that are downstream from the meter, but this is a technology called direct-to-grid, which means that the exact same communication card that's inside a meter is starting to show up in more than one device. That fault circuit indicator on the previous slide had that same device. So what's interesting is we're now starting to see the diversity of devices growing and becoming much richer. You're going to keep having a growing diversity of devices, which allows more and more interesting kinds of applications to start showing up. And just yesterday, I was talking to somebody who was in the transformer monitoring business, who you know, can easily imagine how you could now have a communicating card inside a transformer monitoring device and take the substation level automation to a different level. So these are, again, things where people are going to be doing large-scale programs, and the associated software matters a whole lot, because it's not just about putting a load control switch out there to control a device. It's how do you actually, in a precise way, know that you're going to get the load shed. That's been the tricky part. So we have some software coming soon that allows you to pool and group by the likelihood of how certain you will be to get that kind of demand load shed from a given customer base. Now, that allows you to become smarter and more clever at offering price incentive programs to perhaps the people that you can count on for opt-in versus perhaps people that are a little more iffy in terms of their opt-in. Because and again, this is a good example of how these different things that were historically silos are starting to come together and create far more complex and richer solutions, and frankly, that just means you have more choice in how you implement that. All right, item number 3. Well, now that there's a territory-wide canopy network backbone out there doing one thing and starting to do more than one thing, what about the ability to, in fact, take care of smaller service providers? So a classic case here is water companies that might be sitting co-located under the large network canopy. There is no reason why the same network can't, in fact, read water devices. And so this is a service provider in a large network offering its network services to a smaller service provider that's sitting underneath that canopy. Now, by the way, depending on who you talk to, people can get pretty interesting in the different kind of services. So while I've shown water on one of the clouds here, and I left it open to your imagination with other service providers, we've had people approach us about, well, that's interesting. How about parking meters? You think parking meters could ride on the same canopy traffic? Well, yeah, they actually can. How about street lights? Traffic control? So these are not fantasy questions. These are real live programs that we are engaged in now in several places in the world where people want to use the same backbone canopy to carry low traffic. So remember, this is not about video streaming to your phone, right? This is a very different kind of network and a very different kind of data packet talking back from vending machines or parking meters or street lights and traffic light controllers and so on. So I think this, by the way, 5 years from now, we're going to look back, and if you're sitting there wondering whether, you know, oh, this sounds too crazy, 5 years from now, I think we're going to look back and go, oh, it's just a natural thing. You know, it was a network. It was meant for multiple things. What else were you thinking back then? So watch for that over the course of the next many years. All right, integrating renewables. Hot topic. And it's because, of course, depending on where you are, various kinds of monetary incentives are driving the consumers to put more and more solar panels up on their rooftops and more, and certainly large-scale generation stations. So the worst case number I've heard about is in Hawaii, where they're expecting up to 50% of their generating capacity coming from renewables. And the dynamic range that it experiences is such that it's really teaching us a whole lot more about the kind of control that is going to be expected. The pressures that are being put there are really interesting in how quickly distributed intelligence has to act. There may not even be time for signals to come all the way back to a control room for humans to sort of figure out what to do with some of these things. So this is a great example, by the way, of how being involved in some leading edge work, and this is a Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy funded grant in Maui, where the Hawaiian Electric Company working with the Maui Electric Company is doing some really interesting things. They're sort of pushing the envelope on nearly everything. And we are a participant in that project, in fact, writing the next generation of the Smart Energy Profile 2.0 spec, SEP 2.0. And I offer that as an example because, you know, this is how you stay at the cutting edge of innovation. You have to, as a company, be involved in those sorts of things at a deep enough level that you are literally creating and writing the technology for the next standard and understanding it while all the problems are happening, because that's actually how the de-risking occurs. The de-risking for the larger market occurs because we're spending a lot of R&D money on what you might think are very speculative ventures, but that's exactly how we learn and take the risk out of the problem for you, right? So a lot of things happening in that space. All right, number 5 is analytics. So the common knowledge, lots of data is coming off the grid. What does one do with it? Well, I show you just a few samples of things that we're playing around with right now, ranging from, you know, just the top part of it is, well, how well is the network working? At the scale of the networks we operate, we care about this a lot. This is mission critical, day-to-day, real-time work, because, you know, it's not an experiment. We're operating 13 million of these daily around the world. So link quality, node connectivity, backbone status, all of these matter because it's mission critical to not just get the read. By the way, that will only improve in terms of sort of the demands as we start doing demand response and distribution automation. Now, on the bottom are some other ones that are quite interesting. The middle one is a sag and swell chart, which the particular utility absolutely did not believe that they had that range of sags and swells until they went and checked the transformers and the changers, and in many cases the load tap changers had been set wrong years and years ago and nobody had bothered to check. So these are all in the aggregate the way that operating and maintenance costs are going to come down. So these are all things that nobody ever knew to even look at because you couldn't get to the data. So beyond the basic business case that might be made, these are the kinds of things that are resulting in a higher level of cost reduction over time. That fault circuit indicator I told you about that hangs on the line and inductively powered, the waveform signals that come off of it, there are people who believe that those could be interpreted to figure out how to do better vegetation management because you'd know from the waveform whether in fact tree limbs were brushing up against there. All right, so quickly, you know, disaggregation is a hot topic. I won't spend a lot of time here. The point is the algorithms behind this are getting better and better every day, and with more granular data, we're starting to see the fact that you in fact could empower consumers in a big way, but I'll leave that for Ken to talk about. So to wrap up, I think this is going to get more interesting because it's a richer set of things you can do with the grid now that the basic grid is working. On the advanced metering side, the next big things are expansion into water, gas, theft reduction, prepay solutions, in the distribution automation side, moving into much more, not just, as I said, restoration, acceleration, CVR or voltage optimization, which can be potentially, by the way, the historic model-based approach maybe got 1.5% to 2% savings of the base load. We believe it's possible to double that to 4%. And in the peak load side, a number of different solutions. And the good news is, as he's standing up, I'm actually on my last slide. Beautiful timing, isn't it?
Thank you.
All right, so I'll leave you with the grand image of the Internet of Things to come. And that is that the network is absolutely capable of handling this kind of traffic and this diversity of devices over time. And that's where we're going to go, based on real day-to-day input from all of you and many others around the world, telling us where to invest and what to prioritize, because, boy, the choices and the cool things to be done are many. But what we do is we listen very, very careful to people like you, to know that to try and point our R&D agenda to make sure that we can unlock the greatest value for you. So with that, thank you.
Thank you very much.